Now, with no further ado, let me hand over the stage to Bas Dijkstra. Bas, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jochem. As Jochem has already said, I'm Bas Dijkstra. I'm a test automation trainer and consultant. I live in the Netherlands, just like Jochem does. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, most of the time as a consultant, and the last couple of years also more and more as a test automation trainer, where I provide training related to all aspects of technical testing and test automation with several tools, several concepts, but also more focused around test automation strategy, how to properly implement test automation, how to make sure that your organization is ready for test automation, make sure that all the preconditions are fulfilled before you even start thinking about specific tools, about specific solutions, about building specific frameworks for your test automation needs, because there's a lot more to test automation than just the tools. I mean, the tools are nice, tools are fun to play with, tools are definitely the most interesting part of implementing test automation. But as we will see in this webinar, there's a lot more to test automation than just writing automated tests. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Before I start, first of all, thank you so much, Jochem and Chantal and the rest of the team at Parasoft for having me for this webinar, because I really like working with you. Let's get started. So, as I said, I've been in the test automation space for around 15 years now. And what I see a lot with test automation is that everybody, and with everybody, I mean not just testers and test automation engineers, but definitely also developers, team leads, product owners, CDOs, everybody who has an interest or is a stakeholder of test automation focuses a lot on how many automated tests do we have. If a test automation team or test automation engineer is tasked with automating the existing regression test, pretty much the only question that we see is, have we automated all of our regression tests already, or how far along are we in the process of automating all of our regression tests?
Bas, can I interrupt you for a second? I'm sorry.
Yes, sure.
It seems that the audio quality is not as we had during the test. Is there any way that we could improve it?
I didn't change anything in the setup, to be honest. So it might be the Zoom platform itself.
That seems like a tricky thing to change for the moment.
Yes.
Maybe just make sure you're close to the microphone, if not already. Let's hope it improves from that area. Yeah, let me not hold you any longer.
Okay, am I still, can you still hear me? Am I still, can people still understand what I'm saying, or not at all?
At the moment, it sounds clearer to me personally. I haven't had any feedback from the people. Yes, there's a positive reactions.
Okay, let me continue then.
Thank you very much.
Okay, no problem at all. So there's a lot of focus on have we automated all of our regression tests already, or what is our test coverage at the moment? What percentage of our of all the behavior, of all the functionality of our application is covered by automated tests? But also think about questions like, I have this specific test that I want to perform. How can I automate it? How can I use my existing tools to automate a specific test? Or how can I, what's the best tool to automate this test that I have, this test that I want to perform as part of my automated test suite, my regression test suite maybe. Or people, there's in the test automation space, there are a lot of new tools popping up left, right, and center pretty much every day now for that's what I see. And all of them promise even more, better and faster automation with less effort, effort required to create those automated tests, and less effort required to maintain the existing automated tests. But what I've been working with a lot of different clients and a lot of different test automation projects, and what I see happening too often is that this, I would almost say, a relentless focus on creating tests and creating more tests doesn't necessarily lead to the results that people would like to have from, people would like to gain from their test automation. And the main problem that I see with that is that, especially with teams that are less mature in their test automation efforts, teams or organizations that are just starting out with test automation, is that they start with what I think is the final part of a solid test automation strategy. So they, what I see happen too often is that they pick a tool, they pick any tool, they pick a popular tool or the tool that somebody else has recommended or a tool that's been available in the organization for a while, and they just start creating tests and running their tests and maintaining their tests without paying enough effort, without spending enough effort to create a solid test automation strategy. And that's what I would like to talk about today. What are, because sure, creating tests is fun and it's also the easy part, but you can really paint yourself into a corner really quickly if you don't tackle what I think are much more important questions with regards to a test automation strategy before you pick up a tool and start automating your tests. And these questions that you need to ask, these things that you need to consider, some of them are technical, related to tools and languages and your application on the test. But definitely, and I think those are the maybe even more important ones, these are organizational, related to organizational questions or issues or things that you need to tackle before you start creating your automated tests. So one of the things that I too often see going wrong is who's going to create and maintain the test. This is definitely an organizational issue with a lot of teams that I work with a lot of organizations that I work with. I see one person coming up with a cunning plan of, yeah, when we're going to use test automation to make our testing efforts more efficient. And of course, while that's a good thing to do, you really need to consider who's going to create and maintain those automated tests. So who is going to be made responsible for creating and maintaining those tests? Are you going to, and that is closely related to how your development organization is organized, is structured. Do you have if you have several development teams, it makes sense to have somebody who is knowledgeable enough to has the skills, has the experience to create those automated tests. make them responsible for creating the tests, for maintaining the tests. And if you don't have the necessary knowledge within each specific team, maybe you want to create a dedicated test automation team that serves multiple teams with taking the first steps into the world of test automation, and help them get started, get started creating their first tests, maintaining their tests in a way that the people within the teams can then build upon that and extend those tests. And because I don't think it's a good idea to make a dedicated test automation team solely responsible for all the test automation across different development teams, because I truly believe that creating and maintaining test automation is a team responsibility in the end, but that doesn't mean that every team will have to have a specific person available from the start. You can definitely start with, and it's even one knowledgeable person that starts implementing test automation for a couple of teams, but it's very important that you take the other team members by the hand, because otherwise you're going to create a single point of failure with that one knowledgeable person or that small team that's responsible for all the test automation. So definitely and make it spread like oil drifting on the sea, maybe. Start out small, take the people in the development teams by the hand, see how test automation can help them perform the testing more efficiently, how they maintain those tests, train them, organize workshops maybe in your organization where people who in the different development teams that maybe aren't as knowledgeable in or as experienced in the field of test automation yet, how they teach them with those workshops how to use the existing test automation, how to extend it and how to use it effectively in their day-to-day work. This is closely related to another question that I often ask teams and organizations that I work with. So how do you go to share knowledge between teams? Because while, and especially in agile software development, teams should be not self-organizing, and responsible for their own software development life cycle. It's definitely a good idea because there's always things that you can share, that you can learn from what's happening in other teams. So how to share that knowledge that you're going to slowly start building up when you're starting out with your test automation efforts. That's a really important factor to take into consideration. If you don't share knowledge, don't share your learnings, don't share your problems across teams, then it's very well possible that all the teams are going to start doing their own thing. And up to a certain extent, that's definitely good, but you don't want to have each team drift off in a different direction and go their own way without any regard of what else is happening in the organization. So by all means, organize your teams or your maybe even your whole organization in a way that you can share that knowledge between teams, make specific chapters for test automation, or just come together. What we do with the current client that I'm working with all testers that are located in the different development teams. We come together a couple of times a week just to do a quick sort of stand-up, or where we share the things that we achieved and the things that hold us back, and find out how we can help each other and how we can learn from each other to move forward. And definitely test automation is a big subject there, because there are a couple of people who are quite knowledgeable with regards to test automation, but there's definitely a lot of people in there that can still learn a lot as well. So make sure that before you start writing automated tests in the different teams, that there is a common goal, even if the different teams are organized differently or use different tech stacks, that you have a common vision of where the test automation should be going to, and make sure that all the different teams know from one another what's happening there, and so that they can learn from each other. I've talked about Agile a bit a couple of minutes ago, and how before, this is more of a team internal thing. Make sure that test automation fits in your definition of done. I don't mean that, and I've seen teams struggle with this a lot, either because they didn't have any test automation in their definition of done at all, or on the other end, that they had too many statements about test automation in the definition of done. So not having test automation be made a part of your definition of done is definitely not a good thing, and I'll talk about that a little more with the next question that we're going to address. But too much focus on test automation in your definition of done can also have some pretty annoying side effects. For example, if you have a lot of very focused, very detailed, very numbers-oriented statements about test automation in your definition of done, test automation will likely become a goal of its own within a sprint, instead of what it should be, what test automation should be, which is a way to perform your testing efforts and your software development efforts in general more efficiently. So I've definitely seen some teams struggle with, but our definition of done says that we need X percentage of code coverage for our automated unit tests. So a story or a feature is not done unless we have 100% code coverage. And while I think unit tests are wonderful, but code coverage is a really lousy way of measuring the quality of your automated unit tests. And that's just one example of how very specific, very metrics-oriented statements about test automation in your definition of done can be harmful rather than helpful. So definitely consider adding a statement like, we have considered adding automated acceptance test or automated regression test or automated unit test, or maybe even a performance or security test to our automated test suite. And definitely consider adding something like that to your definition of done. but be flexible with it. Don't focus too much on the numbers or on the coverage, but because those doing that will likely make test automation become a goal of its own rather than a means to a higher end, which is being able to develop high quality software more efficiently. On the other hand, if you don't make test automation an integral part of your daily work, if you don't assign the task of creating and maintaining test automation to maybe to even to specific people in your team, if you don't, I've seen organizations that and especially tech leads or CTOs maybe, or suppose those, yeah, we need test automation, but we also need to deliver features to our clients, and that's more important. And I definitely agree that in the end, that's more important, because nobody has ever paid for, no end client or end user has ever paid for a set of automated tests for a product. And they pay or they buy the product itself, not the automated tests that come with it. But if you focus only on delivering as many features as possible, as many new functions or bits and bobs or buttons as you can within a sprint, without ensuring that you also have a healthy and maintainable test automation suite, then you'll likely, again, maybe it works for the short term, so maybe that tactic works for a couple of sprints, but as your product grows, as your testing is likely becoming the bottleneck again that we don't want it to be anymore. So make sure that you, with all people in your team, and also maybe even the people outside of your team who are responsible for bringing features or feature requests into the team, and make sure that enough time is taken during sprint planning or during project planning, if you maybe you don't work in an agile setting yet, that enough time is dedicated to creating and maintaining automated tests, because in the long run, and that'll help you to smoothen the process and to make the process of delivering high quality software at a reliable and at a predictable speed. That makes it much easier if you give test automation the time and the attention that it needs and that it requires. So, and finally, this is the last of the organizational factors that I would like to address today, and that I feel not every organization out there is aware of enough, is what does success look like for the test automation efforts that you're undertaking? When do you have enough test automation? Do you ever have enough test automation? What, and this is related to how do you know and how do you keep track of the fact that you're going in the right direction with your test automation efforts? How do you make sure that you don't build a large set of automated tests that work perfectly but don't actually bring any value, maybe they give you a false sense of security? How do you know that you spend enough time on your test automation efforts? How do you know that you don't spend too little time on it? How do you know that you don't spend too much time on it? Is it actually going to bring you any value, the test automation? Is it bringing you the efficiency that you hope to gain from it? Does it actually shorten your feedback loop? Does it free up more time for your development team and for the testers in the development team to do the more interesting stuff? How do you measure that? Those are all things that you need to address, need to monitor, need to discuss with everybody in the team. If we're going to spend time on our test automation efforts, how do we know that we spend the time in a useful manner? And those are only some of the organizational factors that make up a solid test automation strategy. There are more. I think I could think of more, but those are not per se a top 5 that I want to give, but 5 really important questions that you need to consider with regards to organizational issues if you're going to come up with a solid test automation strategy. There are also a lot of more technical aspects of test automation and implementing test automation. This is more on the technical side, whereas the organizational questions that we addressed before, and those are more strategic issues or strategic matters that need to be talked. These are more on an operational, on a tactical level. And the first one is, as I said, as the title of this webinar, it is creating tests is easy, but and this is one of the biggest problems that I still see in test automation from a technical point of view, is that a lot of automated tests are not created at the most efficient level, with the most efficient scope, with the using the right seams, where I define a seam as the border between 2 layers in your application architecture. So questions that you could ask is, on a general level, is this the most efficient way to get the information that I want out of this test? Because testing is all about providing information, retrieving information about the quality of your application on the test, and for every automated test that you create, I would like to advise you to ask yourself, is this the most efficient way to retrieve that information? Is the scope of my automated tests not too large? I see a lot of people starting to build a test automation framework or a test automation solution, and then trying to fit all of their existing regression tests in that automated testing framework. And a lot of times I see people still using end-to-end testing tools like Selenium or Cypress or Catalan or whatever tool to test things that could just as easily be tested on a much smaller scope, with a much smaller part of your application stack involved, because I see them testing or writing test automation for behavior that doesn't necessarily require the user interface. And the fewer layers in your application architecture that are involved in your automated tests, the more likely is that your test is fast and easy to repeat and easy to set up, and it's giving you the right information as a result. And so you could slice off some of the layers on top at the top of your application architecture, maybe. So maybe don't use the UI for specific tests that validate backend logic, because that logic isn't implemented in the user interface. So why use the user interface to verify that logic? But it also works the other way around. If you don't need the entire backend to validate to verify some behavior or some things or some functionality that resides in the front end, why not use a stubbing or a service virtualization tool to mock out the backend to focus your automated tests solely on the front-end layers of your application under test and make your automated tests more efficient in that way. So for each test, for each function, for each piece of behavior that you want to test, for each bit of information that you want to get out of your application under test when you're writing automated tests, ask yourself, what layers of my application architecture are involved here, and how can I zoom my test in so that they only use those layers of my application architecture without letting myself get distracted by what all of the other layers of my application are doing. Another thing where test automation fails sometimes is that the infrastructure and the setup of the automated test is not ready for being run on demand. If you want to integrate if you want to really benefit from your automated tests, you want to run them as often as possible. And that means that your environment should also be ready to run your tests as often as possible. So, and there are a couple of factors that can block the ability to run your tests on demand. And most importantly, those are your test environment and your test data. So, and this is where, again, where tools like stubbing or service virtualization tools can definitely help you and make it easier to run your tests on demand. If you don't need to rely on external services that you need in your testing anymore, but that are hard to control or outside of your control entirely. Maybe replace them with virtual assets or stubs to make it easier to run your automated tests on demand. Or what I've seen in a recent project I've been working on, when the spinning up of a test environment, the creation of a test environment, the provisioning of the applications in the test environment, that was all part of the automated test run. So then you don't need dedicated test environments anymore. The creation and the provisioning of a test environment is simply part of the automated test run, and that makes it much easier to run your tests once, twice, or maybe even 100 times a day without having to make sure that your test environment is reset, your test data is in the right state, because your automated testing process itself takes care of all of those. So, and that definitely needs some investment of time, but in the long run, it'll definitely help you scale up your test automation efforts and profit from them even more. This is obvious, probably, to a lot of you. Tests stored under version control. the underlying question is, how easy is it to work on the same test suite or the same test automation framework, the same test automation solution with different people and maybe even across different teams? And the selection of a specific test, the design of a test automation framework, or the selection of a specific test automation tool, if you're in that process, you definitely need to consider, how easy is it to share my work with other people? How easy is it to collaborate with multiple people, maybe even in different teams, in the same solution? And I've definitely seen tools that make it hard to put the automated tests that are created in those tools under version control. And that also makes it much harder to make them part of a continuous delivery or continuous integration or continuous delivery pipeline if you can't freely store tests in version control and run them on any developer's machine or as part of an automated pipeline. So definitely consider the ease, how easy it is to put your tests in Git or in Subversion or whatever version control system you're using, because it makes it much easier to share your work with others and to allow others to contribute to the automated tests. If you really want to get the most out of your automated tests, as I said, you want to run them as often as possible, and that means they should be made part of a pipeline or of a scheduled process, because otherwise it's easy to just skip running your automated tests. And then why create them in the first place if you're going to skip executing them again? So definitely make sure that your tests are part of a pipeline or a scheduled process. And an underlying question here is, do we add all of our tests, all of the automated tests that we create, inside our build, inside our pipeline? And yes and no would be my answer. Yes, because you want your tests to be run as often as possible. You want the feedback, the information that those automated tests give you to give you that information, that feedback, as often as possible. But I've also seen some build processes that are too heavy on automated tests. So especially if you have a lot of lengthy end-to-end tests, maybe you don't want to add all of those tests to a pipeline, to the central pipeline, and just run them as part of a nightly process. So developers, whenever they check in a new version of the code, don't have to wait until your full automated test run, which may take an hour or 2 hours or maybe even longer, because by then they'll have moved on to other work too. So one rule of thumb that I always try and instill is that a main build shouldn't take longer than 10 minutes tops, but and try and keep it under 5. If you keep it under 5 minutes, then you're sure that your development team gets fast feedback on the changes that they made in the application under test. So make sure that your automated tests aren't becoming a bottleneck for getting that feedback across to your developers. And finally, are our tests reliable and informative? So, and this has something to do with has a little bit to do with what I said earlier about creating tests of the right scope, because it's really when you have a automated test or an automated test suite that is really heavy on end-to-end tests that are where smaller scope tests would have also given you the same kind of test coverage. The larger the test in scope, the less likely is it that they're going to be informative, that they're going to give you the right bit of information about what went right and what went wrong in your test run and in your application. And the other part is your test should also be reliable. And in my experience, the smaller the scope of your test, the higher the likeliness of it being a really reliable test is. And because it's the more layers there are involved in an automated test, the higher the risk is that any of those layers or any of those parts that are being tested makes the test result unreliable. Another thing that I would recommend is also always before you add more and more tests to your pipeline, make sure that your tests actually test the thing that you want it to test, and make sure that it fails when it should, and make sure that it passes reliably, of course, because nothing's more annoying than tests that fail when there's nothing wrong in your application on the test. But maybe even more dangerous are tests that always pass. And what I always say, and I didn't make this up, I didn't come up with this line myself. I don't know who actually came up with it, but never trust a test you haven't seen fail, because if a test always passes, I don't know if it's actually going to catch that bug when I wanted to. And for unit, one last thing that I want to recommend there is for unit testing, there's a technique called mutation testing, which actually helps you in an automated manner to determine the quality of your automated unit tests. But, and I'm not sure whether something similar exists for higher level tests, but at those mutation testing is a technique that helps you determine the quality of your unit tests. So that they inject small failures in your actual application, and they see if your unit tests detect those failures. And if they don't, your unit test is worthless. For other types of tests, I'm not sure whether something like that exists yet or is practical enough in use. So for those types of tests, I would recommend going through them every once in a while, maybe every sprint, maybe every couple of months, and just take some time, maybe creating a task or a user story for it, to take some time out to go through your existing automated test suite and see if all of the tests that are in there are still valuable. Do they still work? Do they still fail when they need to? Are they even necessary still? Because if not, then maybe it's best to disable them or even remove them altogether. And people are often really reluctant to throw away automated tests because they've spent time and effort and therefore money to create those tests a while ago. But if they're no longer valuable to you, then why not remove them? Because I'm all for keeping your automated test suite as lean as possible. So having said that, I prepared a small story about a case study, but Jochem informed me already that our time is nearly up, so I'm going to skip that, unfortunately, and hand it over to the Q&A.
Thank you, Bas. Thank you for the insightful examples that you have given. We do have a couple of questions that popped up. There's an initial one here from Neil van Steenderen. His question is, we have a large suite of test data. Unfortunately, they take very long time to run. Also, they are mislabeled at the wrong levels and many overlapping tests. Do you have any suggestions on where to start cleaning this up?
Yeah, I see the question myself. That's really hard to answer without knowing a little more about your context, but I'd start with the tests that take the longest to run, because those have the most impact on your overall on the overall duration of your automated tests. And it's often the and now I'm talking in terms of tests of a different scope. So I definitely start with the larger, the more expensive test with the larger scope, the end-to-end tests maybe, or the larger integration tests, and check if all of those tests really have to be an end-to-end test or have to be a large integration test. What is it that they're what behavior are they actually verifying, and do you really need such a long-lasting, and expensive and time-consuming end-to-end test for that? And I'm not sure, because I can't, from this question, I can't tell the context that you're in, or if you do work with end-to-end tests, or if those are even a problem. But I'd start with the tests that take the longest, and because they and see if you can reduce them in scope, or if you maybe even don't need them anymore altogether anymore, if you can reduce the amount of those expensive tests or those time-consuming tests.
Let's see. We have the context from Neil.
Yes. Multi-component system, multi-teams, unit integration, and front-end tests. Yeah, in general, see the test that cross the most layers, and see if you can reduce them in scope, and check for all of your tests, and if the amount of time to run them is becoming a bottleneck, if you really need all of those tests in the first place, and if all of the layers that are involved in the test really need to be in the test, because the fewer the amount of layers, the quicker it is to run a test.
And maybe if you're looking for more details on the answer, Neil, or if you would like to get that conversation started, we could reach out on your email to answer the question maybe more in depth as well.
Sure, no problem at all.
Sorry?
No problem at all.
Excellent. Jumping to the next question from Ed Kizalu. Do you have them available, Bas?
Yes, with our API test, we have an overlap between our container and our component test. I'm not exactly sure what it is you mean, but okay, I have a sort of an image of what you're talking about when you talk about component tests. I don't really know what you mean by container tests. What Ed asks is, what's the best strategy to ensure the overlap doesn't happen anymore, or is this something that we should live with? Again, and this is really a question of what are you testing, and what layers are involved in what layers are required to get the information that you're looking for. And sometimes you can't avoid a little bit of overlap, but as long as you make sure that you don't unnecessarily use layers in your application stack or components in your application landscape, that you don't actually need for the test that you're performing, then at least you're taking steps towards optimizing your test automation strategy. And again, without some more insight into your specific context, it's not an easy task to give a really detailed answer on you should do this, then this, then this. But and again, because I don't really mean what you mean with container tests, but again, the most important thing here to me is checking that your tests are as small as they can be.
Thanks again, Bas. Moving to, I guess, what will be the last question for now. In the Q&A panel, we have a question from Martin.
I can find in the Q&A. There you go. Okay, I'm a senior developer trying to push the organization into using unit testing. We have big system tests, including a lot of hardware. Oh boy. The fact that you want the test to be reliable seems obvious. Any hints on how to communicate to the less technical managers that unit tests is more reliable and stable and why that matters? And first, I'll add to those less technical managers or to people that read the results of your automated test runs. How those tests are performed aren't and that's not important to them. And what's important to them, what should be important to them, is how's my application on the test behaving? Is it more reliable, more stable? And if you can show them or demonstrate to them that you can get that information that you're looking for, that they might be looking for as well, just as well with unit tests, and not necessarily require those big system and integration and end-to-end tests. And actually give them an example or a case where adding all those extra layers into your tests, and show them that they don't contribute to the information that you're looking for, that they're actually making your tests slower and harder to maintain, and maybe draw them a picture of your application architecture and show them that, hey, the thing that I'm trying to verify here in these automated tests, that's implemented in these layers. So I don't need all of the other components, and maybe not even the hardware that you're using in your test runs. And maybe show them and see, well, I could test this, I could verify this just as easily with unit tests or small component tests, and show them, tell them, demonstrate to them that those can be run much faster. Maybe they require some upfront work, maybe they require some refactoring initially to be able to actually write those unit tests. I don't know, maybe I don't know how testable your code or your application architecture is, but show them and not just tell them that those unit tests are the more obvious way to do this. So I hope this helps. If not, feel free to follow up, and I'd be happy to take some more time and discuss this even more with you.
Thank you very much, Bas. Maybe to add one explanation that I personally always use in my conversations, code is exactly the same as writing a letter, right? Your static analysis of your code is the same as the spell checker, making sure the letters you use form a word. The unit testing is the same level as the grammar check. Does the sentence you write make sense? And then all the words that you use to write a sentence and to tell the story is basically when you go to your functional testing. And those are levels that are comparable to the ways of explaining to less technical people why you should actually test your code. But this is indeed something that we can still reach out on, Martin. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for your attendance. There will be a link made available to the people who have registered to the sessions. If you have not received a link to this webinar, feel free to reach out to either info@parasoft.com or to me personally at jochem.vekes@parasoft.com, and we will make sure that you get the recording. So once again, Bas, thank you very much for your time and your insights and the answers you've provided. In case any other questions pop up, we'll connect you to each other. Thanks again, all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much for having me, Jochem. It's been a pleasure. And again, also from my part, thanks to all of the attendees for taking the time out of your working day to attend this webinar. And I hope you enjoyed it.